On June 30th, 1908, something flattened 80 million trees across Siberia, and no one saw it coming. The official story is straightforward. A meteor or comet exploded above the remote Tunguska region, releasing energy equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, and vanished without leaving a crater. But here's where the courtroom skepticism kicks in. That narrative has a fatal flaw. It requires us to accept an extraordinary claim based on extraordinarily thin evidence. So before we close the case, we need to ask, what actually happened that morning? And why do some people still insist we've been sold a lie? Let's start with the crime scene itself. In 1927, 19 years after the blast, Soviet scientist Leonid Kulik led an expedition into the Siberian taiga. What he found was undeniable. Roughly 80 million trees, flattened radially outward from a central point, like a giant hand had pressed down and released. The blast radius stretched across 150 square kilometers. Kulik's photographs are stark, almost surgical in their devastation. But here's the first crack in the meteor hypothesis. There was no crater. A meteor impact of that magnitude should have left a bowl-shaped scar in the earth. Instead, investigators found only a slight depression and scorched soil. The prosecution would argue this proves the impact theory. The defense counters. That's exactly what you'd expect if the object exploded midair, never touching ground. Reasonable people disagree, but the evidence doesn't decisively favor either side yet. Now, the mainstream scientific consensus, and this is where the burden of proof lies, settles on the airburst hypothesis. A stony meteoroid, roughly 10 to 20 meters across, entered Earth's atmosphere at hypersonic speed. At an altitude of somewhere between 5 and 10 kilometers, the atmospheric pressure and friction became too much. The object disintegrated violently, releasing its kinetic energy as heat and shockwave. This model fits the evidence. It explains the lack of a crater. It explains the radial tree fall. It's elegant, testable, and widely accepted. So why does the conspiracy persist? Because the narrative isn't settled in the public mind. Absence of evidence becomes, for some, evidence of absence of honesty. In 1938, a Soviet film crew shot footage of the devastation, and those images circulated through Cold War media channels with whispers attached. What if it wasn't a natural event? What if it was a weapons test? What if someone knew and covered it up? The questions are seductive because they imply hidden knowledge. Let's examine the alternative theories with the rigor they deserve. One popular claim: the explosion was caused by a Tesla weapon or secret military experiment. The evidence? Circumstantial at best. Tesla was in New York in 1908. No credible documentation links him to Siberia or to any device capable of such destruction. The claim relies on retrofitting Tesla's reputation as a mad inventor onto a historical vacuum. When you actually check the historical record, it collapses. Another variant, a UFO crash. Proponents argue that no eyewitness accounts mention a meteor, and the local indigenous Evenki people described strange lights and heat. But here's the prosecutorial problem. The region was sparsely populated. The nearest settlements were tens of kilometers away. Eyewitness testimony from that distance, in the pre-telephoto era, would be vague at best. A brilliant light in the sky could mean many things. It doesn't require extraterrestrial intervention. Here's where the con artist's playbook becomes visible. These alternative theories thrive on one psychological principle. They flatter the believer's sense of special knowledge. You're not fooled by the official story. You see through the veil. You've done your research. But that same flattery is what makes you vulnerable to confirmation bias. You seek evidence that supports your theory and dismiss contradictory data as part of the cover-up. It's the oldest trick in the deception handbook. The scientific case for the airburst is built on multiple converging lines of evidence. Seismic data, analyzed decades later, supports an explosion at altitude. Magnetic anomalies in the soil match predictions from impact models. The composition of fallen trees and the distribution of blast debris align precisely with what computer simulations predict for a 10-megaton airburst. These aren't isolated facts. They form a coherent, reproducible story. But in this matter, science doesn't claim absolute certainty. Researchers continue to study the Tunguska site. In 2007, a team used palynological analysis to examine pollen layers in the soil, refining the timeline. In 2013, researchers published findings on the composition of impact glass. The investigation remains open, methodical, and self-correcting. That's the opposite of a cover-up. That's how truth actually works. The real deception here is subtle. It's not that governments are hiding the truth about Tunguska, it's that the mystery itself becomes a product. Documentaries are made, Books are sold, YouTube channels grow, the ambiguity is monetized, and the more money flows toward the mystery, the less incentive exists to solve it. That's not a conspiracy. It's economics, it's human nature. So what actually happened on June 30th, 1908? A rocky object, probably a stony meteoroid, entered Earth's atmosphere at roughly 12 kilometers per second. Friction and pressure heated it to thousands of degrees. At an altitude of 5 to 10 kilometers above the Tunguska region, it could no longer hold together. The object fragmented, releasing energy equivalent to 10 to 15 megatons of TNT. The shockwave flattened trees across an area the size of a small country. No mystery, no cover-up, just physics. The question that opened this investigation: was it a cosmic deception or a natural catastrophe? Presents a false choice. It was neither deceptive nor conspiratorial. It was a natural catastrophe, fully explained by known physics, studied by legitimate science, and available to anyone willing to examine the evidence honestly. The real deception lies elsewhere, in the profitable ambiguity of unsolved mysteries, in the human hunger for hidden knowledge, in the way we mistake skepticism for wisdom, when we dismiss the most plausible explanation without stronger evidence. Subscribe to this channel. Each week we examine the cases where deception actually happened, where evidence was buried, where systems were exploited. Tunguska wasn't one of them, but the next one might be. Subscribe. Each week, we separate the real conspiracies from the profitable myths.